Hey, good morning. It's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Today I want to talk to you about how to prepare your roses for winter. And hey, look, I get it. It's still summer and there's still plenty happening in the garden, clearly. So I could forgive you a little bit of resentment for me trying to drag you forward into the depths of winter already, at least mentally. But there are a couple of topics that bear discussion on roses right now because there are a couple of practices you need to discontinue to improve or give your roses the best chance of survival. So I'll talk about those in this video here, but I don't want to freak you out. Roses are a northern temperate climate shrub. They are built to survive in winters like this one here. Some more so than others, I guess I would say. Some roses are hardier, some roses are a little more tender. So I'm going to talk about what you can do to give them the best chance of survival, but I also want to answer a couple of questions. There are people who've asked me on previous versions of this video what they can do in a harsher climate to handle some of those roses that are a little more tender. That is, aside from just stopping bad practices, what can they actively do to protect the roses in a harsher winter climate? The third thing I want to talk about is overwintering roses in containers, so hang tight, I'll discuss all of that in this video. I'm standing here with a wild rose. This is Rosa rubrifolia or Rosa glauca, depending on how you want to say it. And this one here is typical of a wild rose. It follows a cycle where it blooms once in the spring, and then it ripens its fruit, and then it's done for the year. It settles down and gets ready for the winter. That's what any rose with good common sense would do. Fortunately for us, our roses in the garden don't have common sense, and you're able to do things like fertilize them throughout the season and give them a pruning or a deadheading to help them to rebloom and give you more color all the way throughout the year. Hey, I wouldn't have it any other way, but the truth is that when you do those things later in the season, it can make your roses a little bit vulnerable to winter dieback. That is, if you prune and fertilize in, say, September or October, and your roses are having a stretch of good weather, they'll continue to grow and bloom, but that soft new growth becomes very vulnerable to winter dieback. So that's something I'd like you to consider stopping right now if you live in a climate that has a cold winter that you have to contend with. If you're in California, you might not have to worry about this at all. But in my climate, it's better if I shut down on the pruning and fertilizing. In August is the right timing for me. Okay, so if you're willing to give up fertilizing and give up pruning for the August onward stretch, maybe you'll be willing to give up one more thing, and that is mulching around the base of your plants. So you see bark mulch against the base of the plant here. I've put it down there just to demonstrate something that I don't want you to do, which is to take organic mulches like bark mulch, manure, compost, alfalfa, anything else, and hill it up against the base of the plant. I know that some old gardening books do recommend this to increase the chances of your roses getting through the winter. The answer on my part is no. It holds too much moisture, and that will actually increase the chance of your rose dying over the winter. Those are the wrong materials. My question is, should you then protect with anything around the base of your plants? And I guess that depends on a hardiness zone. So every rose that's introduced has gone through a testing period or a trialing period, and if you go onto the Help Me Find website, I'll put that in the links below, it will tell you the tested hardiness zone, or at least the experiential gardening zone that gardeners have contributed to say it should be okay to a zone 5 or it should be okay to a zone 7. Those zones correspond to the USDA hardiness zones for your area. So you need to know your zone and you need to know the zone of the rose. If you have chosen a zone appropriate rose, I would suggest that you don't need to mulch anything around the base of the plant or provide any other protective measures. If you're doing something so your hardiness zone is zone 4, the rose's hardiness zone is zone 5 or 6, then you may be able to get the rose through by adding additional protection, but not a wet mulch. Let me show you what you can provide. So let's play pretend together, like I'm in a harsher winter climate and I wanted to wrap this one with some extra protection. Obviously, we're pretending in other ways too, like you wouldn't normally do so when it's covered in foliage and flowers like this. Normally you would wait until after it's hardened off, dropped a lot of its foliage, you might strip a little bit. What I'm going to do on this one here is I'll take off the flowers, I'll take off some of the foliage, I'll bring it down to the right shape for protection, and then I'll show you how to wrap it. So I hope you're going to be able to make this out okay on camera, but this is based on the suggestions of people who live in harsher winter climates than I do. And it's just to post in, bash in a couple of posts along the side, and then take this chicken wire fencing, this plastic wire fencing, you get it at any local hardware store, and just wrap it around the outside. So the main idea of this is to protect the rows from those harsh, cold winter winds that will desiccate out the top tissues. And I guess it would be okay if I saw a little bit of blackness on these stems at the very top here, but if that blackness reaches down to the crown of the rose, we're done for. So if we can find a way to protect the outside of the rose without trapping a bunch of moisture on the inside, that's great. Obviously this is not the finished model. What you would do now that you've got it erected like that is you would throw in some dry leaves. I have oak trees on the property, so I would take my copious amounts of dried oak leaves and throw them into the base of this sort of container, and that would create a wind barrier and some insulation for the base of the rose over the winter. Oh, and one other quick thing, I also got the suggestion from people in winter climates who have done something like this to take as a final step a layer of burlap around the outside, which, you know, might be overkill, but again could cut down on some of that wind getting in and blowing around the leaves that you've placed at the bottom of your cage. Okay, one final topic is to talk about containers, and don't get distracted by the Cleomia and Rudbeckia over there. What do you do about roses that are either in your ornamental containers or like this one here, a production container that I've grown in my greenhouse to cover them for the winter? Now I did a whole other video on how to prune roses in containers over your winter. I won't go over that topic again, I'll just throw the link in the top of the video here. But the biggest question I have after that is where to place them. Where should you put them? Now obviously I overwinter all of my roses in an unheated greenhouse, and most people won't have the luxury of a large unheated greenhouse, but really any place that is a little bit sheltered from the wind is a better candidate than out in the open. So even as rudimentary as tucking them up against the eaves of a house on the side that gets the least amount of wind offers some protection for your container roses. Upgrade from that, if you have a shed or an unheated garage or carport, that would be a good choice too. So really the point is to get them in a place where they are not suffering fluctuations of moisture and temperature or wind or anything like that. That's going to help your roses to get through the winter. Manage them a bit on the dry side, but make sure they don't go bone dry in case you do have one of those winds that come through and start desiccating the tissues or the stems on your roses. That's all I have for how to prepare roses for winter, but I suspect there are questions even after what I've talked about here. So if you do have questions or comments, because I'm not from the harshest winter climate here, relatively mild, I do get some damage, but not the kind of damage you would get in the interior. So if you have some suggestions, I'm sure those would be helpful to other rose gardeners. Thanks for watching today.